The night was cruel, the kind of cold that burned the lungs with every breath. Wind howled across the empty plains, carrying the distant hum of a train and the whispers of a world that had long forgotten mercy. Leela pulled her torn shawl tighter, her fingers numb, her body trembling not just from the cold, but from the exhaustion of living. Beside her, John's small hand clung to hers, fragile, yet grounding. His steps were uneven, his little boots scuffing against the gravel. "Mama, my feet hurt," he whispered, his voice almost lost in the wind. Leela smiled faintly, though her lips quivered. "Just a little more, love," she said. "We'll find shelter soon." But her eyes knew the truth. There was no shelter, not tonight. The moon hung low and heavy, casting silver light over the rusted train tracks stretching into darkness. Each step echoed with a hollow clang. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper warning she couldn't quite hear. Then, a sound. Not the wind, not the train. A groan, human, painful, raw. Leela froze. Her grip on John's hand tightened. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. John nodded, his wide brown eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. The sound came again, low, broken, desperate. They followed it, hearts pounding, until the shape emerged from the shadows. A man, tied to the rails like a sacrifice to some unseen god. His body was massive, his chest heaving, blood streaking his jaw and shirt. For a moment, Leela couldn't breathe. The world tilted. Who would do something like this? "Mama," John's voice cracked, trembling with fear. He's gonna get hit by the train." In the distance, the faint whistle of an approaching locomotive tore through the silence like a scream. Leela's first instinct was to run, to grab her son and flee before the horror unfolded before his eyes. But something deeper rooted her to the ground. Those eyes, even through the blood and pain. His eyes met hers, storm gray, defiant, yet begging for life. Her heart thudded violently. The sound of the train grew louder. Time was slipping away. Without another thought, Leela pushed John back. "Stay here," she ordered, her voice shaking. "Don't move!" Then she ran. The cold bit into her skin as she stumbled toward him, her boots slipping on the gravel. "Hold on," she screamed, though her voice was swallowed by the wind. The man tried to speak, his lips moving without sound. His wrists were bound tight with thick ropes, the kind used for cargo, cutting deep into his flesh. She dropped to her knees, her fingers clawing at the knots. They didn't budge. The whistle grew deafening. The train was close now. "Mama!" John's voice carried through the chaos. "Please!" The light of the oncoming train blazed across the tracks, growing brighter, closer, faster. Come on," she muttered through tears, yanking harder, her nails splitting, blood smearing her hands. The man gasped in agony, but she didn't stop. Fear roared through her veins, yet something stronger, something she couldn't name, pushed her beyond terror. The ground trembled, the rails vibrated. She could feel the power of the oncoming monster racing toward them. "Run," the man rasped weakly. "You can't." "Be quiet," she snapped, desperation sharpening her voice. "You're not dying here." Her fingers slipped, her vision blurred by sweat and tears. The rope wouldn't give. The roar of the train drowned everything, her heartbeat, her thoughts, her son's terrified screams. Then, a single thread loosened. The knot twisted. She pulled with every ounce of strength left in her frail body. A snap. The ropes gave way just as the blinding headlight consumed them both. Leela screamed, dragging him off the rails and throwing herself over him. The train thundered past, a wall of fire and metal screaming into the night. The wind, from its passing, whipped her hair across her face, cutting like blades. For several seconds, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Only the echo of the train's roar and the pounding of her heart filled the night. Then silence. Her body shook uncontrollably as she lifted her head. The man lay beneath her, chest heaving, eyes half open. Blood trickled from a gash above his brow, but he was alive. John ran toward them, tears streaking his cheeks. "Mama, are you okay?" Leela turned her head, nodding weakly. "We're fine," she whispered, but her voice trembled. She looked down again at the stranger she had just pulled from death. He was heavy, built like stone, his breathing shallow but steady. Every line on his face spoke of battles she couldn't imagine. "Why, were you tied there?" she asked softly, still catching her breath. The man's eyes fluttered open, finding hers again. For a heartbeat, she felt something shift inside her, something she couldn't name. He tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "Don't move," she said quickly, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "You'll make it worse." He gave a faint, humorless chuckle, a sound that didn't belong to a dying man. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured, voice rough like gravel. Leela frowned. "Shouldn't have saved you?" His lips twitched into a half smile, dark and broken. "You just saved a dead man." Her heart skipped. His words sank like stones into her chest, heavy, foreboding, impossible to forget. The night wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke and blood. The train had disappeared into the distance, but the echo of its thunder remained, as if warning her that the danger wasn't gone. She didn't know his name, his past, or the world that had tied him there to die, but something in her gut whispered that saving him wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning, and somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes watched from afar. The night wasn't done screaming. The world was still trembling when Leela finally gathered herself. The echo of the train had faded into silence, but her pulse refused to slow. The stranger's body was heavy in her arms, his breath shallow but steady, proof that fate had spared him, at least for now. John stood behind her, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Mama, is he alive?" She nodded, brushing the dirt from her cheek. "Yes, but we need to move him before someone comes." Her words carried more fear than strength. Together, mother and son dragged the unconscious man off the cold gravel, his blood leaving a dark trail under the moonlight. The weight of him was unbearable, his body built like stone, but something deeper than fear drove her forward. The night whispered again, distant, uneasy. Leela felt eyes on her, though she saw nothing but shadows. She turned quickly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, yet her gut twisted. Someone, or something, had seen everything. "Come on, John," she urged, her voice breaking. "Help me lift his arm." They stumbled down the path toward their small wooden house at the edge of the fields. Each step echoed with danger. Every rustle in the grass made her flinch. By the time they reached home, her arms ached and her lungs burned. She pushed open the creaky door, guiding the stranger inside. The small room smelled faintly of herbs and smoke, the only world she had built since her husband's death. She laid him carefully on the old cot near the hearth. Firelight flickered across his face, revealing the depth of his injuries. Blood smeared his temple, and beneath the bruises there were scars, deep, layered, telling stories of violence. Leela swallowed hard, grabbing the small tin box of medicine she kept for emergencies. "Boil water," she told John. The boy nodded quickly, rushing to obey, glancing back every few seconds at the wounded man. Her hands shook as she tore strips of cloth and began to clean his wounds. The stranger didn't stir, but each breath sounded like a war fought inside his chest. The closer he looked, the more she realized this was no ordinary man. His arms were covered in inked patterns, symbols that looked foreign and dangerous. A ring, heavy and gold, clung stubbornly to his bruised finger. "Who are you?" she whispered to herself. A groan escaped his lips. His body tensed, his eyes fluttering open for the briefest moment. Gray, cold as the ocean before a storm. Then they closed again. "Don't move," she muttered, even though he couldn't hear her. The kettle whistled softly. John brought the steaming water, his small hands trembling. "Mama, is he bad?" Leela hesitated. I don't know," she said honestly, dipping a cloth into the hot water. "But he's hurt, and we can't leave him to die." She wiped the blood from his face, revealing the sharp lines of a man built for power, not kindness. His jaw was strong, his expression fierce even in unconsciousness. There was something regal in his stillness, something that felt too large for her tiny house. Hours passed like years. The wind outside died down, replaced by the crackling of fire. Leela sat beside him, exhaustion weighing on her bones. John had fallen asleep on the floor, curled under a blanket, his soft snores breaking the heavy silence. When she looked back at the stranger, his hand twitched, his lips parted. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, broken, but still carried command. "You're safe," she said quickly, unsure if it was true. "You were tied to the tracks. I pulled you out. You're home now." He turned his head slowly, his gaze unfocused. "You saved me?" She nodded. "Yes." He stared at the ceiling, silent for a long while. The firelight danced over his face, revealing pain carved deep into his features. Not just physical, but something darker. "Why were you tied there?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. He didn't answer at first. His eyes drifted toward her, sharp and unreadable. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, edged with something dangerous. "Because enemies don't forgive kings." Leela's breath caught. She wasn't sure she'd heard him right. "Kings?" His mouth curved faintly, not in amusement but in something close to bitterness. "You shouldn't ask too much, little one," he murmured, his voice a mix of gravel and smoke. "Sometimes the truth kills faster than bullets." She frowned, heart pounding. "I wasn't trying to pry, I know," he interrupted, eyes closing again. "You're kind. That's dangerous too." The fire crackled, and Leela felt the air grow heavier. His words carried a weight she didn't understand yet, but part of her already feared what they meant. When dawn crept through the window, spilling light across the room, she found him awake, sitting upright despite his injuries, his gaze fixed on the door as if expecting danger to burst through it. She gasped. "You shouldn't be up." He turned toward her, the faintest smirk ghosting across his face. "I've survived worse." "You'll tear your stitches," she warned, but he only looked at her, really looked at her, as though trying to read the woman who'd pulled him back from the edge of death. His voice dropped to a low murmur. "What's your name?" "Leela," she said. He repeated it quietly, like he was testing the sound of it on his tongue. "Leela." Then after a long pause, he said, "You've got a brave heart, or a foolish one." She crossed her arms. Maybe both. For the first time, he almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They'll come looking for me," he said, his tone shifting like a shadow. "And if they find me here, they'll kill you too." Her blood ran cold. "Who will?" His gaze met hers, and for a heartbeat, everything stilled. The air, the fire, even her pulse seemed to freeze under that storm-gray stare. "My name's Broad," he said finally, his voice steady, dangerous, final. "The one they call the Mafia boss." The bowl in Leela's hand slipped, crashing to the floor, shattering the fragile quiet. John woke with a start, sitting up, startled. "Mama?" She could cuss, and move, couldn't speak. Her world tilted again, the weight of his words pressing into her chest. The Mafia boss. The very name mothers use to scare their children into obedience. The man whose empire was built on fear and fire, and she had brought him into her home. Yet when she looked at him again, there was no malice, no threat, only exhaustion, and something almost human in his eyes. "You saved me," he said again, softer this time, as though it meant something he couldn't explain. Leela's heart trembled. She didn't know whether to feel fear or something else entirely. She had saved a man from death. But in that fragile silence, under the pale light of dawn, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just invited death into her home. And outside, beyond the quiet fields, a single car engine rumbled in the distance. Someone else had already started looking. The sound of that distant car haunted Leela long after dawn had melted into day. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the trees outside made her heart jolt in fear. Yet Broad, the man whose very name sent others trembling, sat calmly in the corner of her small house, like death itself had come to rest and found it oddly peaceful. His wounds were healing, though his strength seemed to return faster than any man should recover. Each morning she'd wake to find him sitting by the window, staring at the horizon as if counting ghosts. He said nothing about his world, about the men who might be hunting him, and she didn't ask. But the silence between them was alive, thick with unspoken questions and something far more dangerous. One afternoon, as she stirred the pot of thin soup, she could feel his gaze on her back, not the gaze of a killer, but of a man who had forgotten what warmth felt like. "You're staring again," she said softly, pretending to sound casual. He didn't deny it. "I'm trying to understand," he murmured. "Understand what?" she asked, turning to face him. His lips twitched, eyes narrowing slightly. "Why you risked your life for a stranger? For me." Leela's throat tightened. "Because no one deserves to die like that." His gaze held hers for a long moment, until she looked away, afraid of what she might see there. That night, the wind carried the scent of rain and something fragile between them. Broad had insisted on fixing the broken latch on her door, his large hands working quietly as thunder grumbled outside. John sat near the fire, playing with his small wooden toy soldiers, occasionally glancing up at the man his mother had saved, a man who could crush worlds but now sat mending a door. When the rain began, it came hard and fast, drumming against the roof like the heartbeat of the earth. The fire flickered, and shadows danced across Broad's face. "You don't have to stay," Leela said quietly, her eyes on the flames. "When you're better, you can go wherever you want." His voice was calm but carried weight. "Where I want to go doesn't exist anymore." She looked up, confusion and curiosity warring in her chest. "Then where will you go?" He gave a slow, humorless smile. "Maybe I'll stay here until I remember what peace feels like." Her breath caught. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else that made her heart stutter. For days after that, the rhythm of their lives found an uneasy balance. She cooked, cleaned, and tended to his wounds, while Broad silently helped fix what little he could: the roof, the leaking pipe, even the broken chair her husband once used. John grew less afraid of him, asking endless questions that Broad actually answered with surprising patience. Sometimes, Lila would find them talking by the fire, her son giggling, Broad listening with an expression that softened his rough edges. It was wrong, she told herself. This man brought danger, yet every time she looked at him, something in her chest warmed despite her fear. One evening, the light from the candle danced across her hands as she sat sewing his torn shirt. The house was quiet, except for the sound of her needle piercing fabric and the crackle of burning wood. Broad sat across from her, watching. "You don't have to fix that," he said after a while. His voice low, smooth, too intimate. "It's fine." She didn't look up. "It's not fine. It's torn." "I've lived with worse things torn," he replied. His words sent a strange chill down her spine. When she finally lifted her eyes, his were already waiting, dark, steady, pulling her in like gravity. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said softly. Her hands froze mid-stitch. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "That's because you're used to people who fear you," she whispered, forcing herself to look away. "I don't fear you." "You should," he said. But the way he said it, almost like a warning, almost like a plea, made her heart ache. She smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just foolish." "Maybe," he agreed, leaning back, his eyes never leaving her. "Or maybe you're the only one left who still believes people can be saved." The words hung in the air between them, raw and disarming. She didn't know what to say, so she focused on the thread trembling between her fingers. John broke the silence with a laugh, holding up his toy soldier. "Mr. Broad, my army's winning." Broad's lips curved slightly, the faintest hint of a real smile, and for the first time since she'd met him, his eyes softened, the storm in them quieting for just a second. Lila watched that smile, and something in her chest shifted painfully. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong to a man like him, too human, too pure for the life he came from. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual guarded calm. When John fell asleep near the fire, Leela gathered his blanket and tucked him in. As she straightened, she turned, and found Broad standing closer than she expected. His height cast her in shadow, the faint scent of rain and smoke clinging to him. "Thank you," he said quietly. For what? She whispered. For giving me something I thought I'd lost a long time ago. Her pulse raised. And what's that? His gaze burned into hers, slow and deliberate. Warmth. The single word felt heavier than it should have, sinking into her skin. He lifted a hand, hesitant at first, then brushed his fingers lightly against hers. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, but it carried a danger she could feel down to her bones. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. No mafia, no fear, no death waiting in the distance. Only them, caught in something neither of them had planned. The candle flickered. His thumb grazed her knuckles, and her heart stuttered violently. You shouldn't look at me like that, he murmured. Like what? She breathed. Like I'm something worth saving. Before she could answer, he stepped back, retreating into the shadows as though fighting something inside him. The rain continued outside, the night thick with tension. Leela stood there, trembling, her hand still warm where he had touched her. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt alive, terrified, but alive. And somewhere in the darkness, Broad sat awake, staring at the faint glow of the fire, his mind at war with the one thing he could never control, his heart. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the world washed in silver light and silence. Lila awoke to the faint creak of the door and the scent of damp earth. Broad was standing by the window, his back to her, already dressed, his wounds long hidden beneath a dark shirt and jacket. The fire had burned low, and the faint mist outside curled like ghosts between the trees. You're leaving, she said quietly, her voice still heavy with sleep and something deeper. He didn't answer right away. You shouldn't get used to having me here, he said finally, his tone calm but distant. My world doesn't belong in yours. Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him that maybe the world didn't have to belong to anyone. That peace could exist, even for men like him. But the words stayed trapped behind her lips. Instead, she stood there in silence as he turned to face her. His storm-gray eyes had softened, just barely. You'll see me again, he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a warning. Then he was gone. The sound of the door closing echoed through the small house, like the end of something she wasn't ready to lose. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Leela tried to return to normal, tending to John, mending clothes, pretending that the man who had disrupted her life hadn't taken a piece of her heart with him. But at night, she would catch herself glancing at the door, half expecting his shadow to appear. And one morning, it did. The deep rumble of an engine broke the stillness outside. Leela stepped out, squinting against the sunlight, only to see a sleek black limo parked by the dirt path. Broad stepped out, surrounded by two men in suits, guards, silent and watchful. In his hand, he carried a single red rose. You came back, she whispered. I told you I would, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. He handed her the rose, its petals impossibly soft against her calloused fingers. You don't need to pay me back, she murmured, her voice trembling. I didn't save you for reward. His lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. Then I'll make you see what it means to be cared for. She didn't know what to say. His presence filled the air, heavy and magnetic, like he brought the entire storm with him. John peeked from behind the doorway, eyes wide with awe. Broad looked at him, his expression softening. Hey, soldier, he said quietly. Still winning your battles? John grinned shyly. Trying to. For the first time, Leela saw something tender flicker across Broad's face, something that didn't belong to a man carved by violence. That evening, he stayed for dinner. It felt almost normal. Almost. But beneath the laughter, a tension brewed like thunder waiting to strike. Broad's men stood guard outside, scanning the shadows, their faces sharp with suspicion. When he noticed her glancing at them, he said softly, They're here to make sure no one finds me. Or you. Her spoon clattered against the bowl. Me? They'll come, he said simply. They always do. His words sent a chill down her spine, but his tone carried something that almost felt like regret. Later, when John had gone to bed, Leela found herself standing by the window, staring at the fields stretching endlessly into the dark. She heard him approach before he spoke. "You shouldn't be afraid of me," he said quietly. "I'm not," she lied. He was close enough that she could feel his breath against her skin. "You should be," he murmured. But before she could respond, the night split open. The first gunshot cracked through the silence like thunder, then another. The windows shattered, glass raining down like ice. "Down!" Broad roared, grabbing Leela and pulling her to the floor as bullets tore through the wooden walls. John screamed from the other room. "John!" Leela tried to rise, but Broad pinned her down. "Stay here! He's my son!" she shouted back, her voice raw with terror. Broad cursed under his breath, then lunged toward the hallway, his gun already drawn. More shots rang out, sharp, merciless. The world became chaos. Leela crawled across the floor, shielding her head, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She saw the front door swing open, one of Broad's men falling lifeless across the threshold. Outside, headlights flashed through the darkness, the growl of engines closing in. John was crying now, his small voice echoing through the storm of violence. Leela ran, grabbed him, and pulled him into her arms, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Mama, I'm scared." "It's okay, baby," she whispered, even though her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold him. Broad appeared again, his face streaked with blood and fury. "They fought and me," he said, breathless. "We have to move, now." "We can't go out there," she cried. "They'll kill us." His eyes met hers, fierce and determined. "Not while I'm breathing." Another kyagsa. Explosion, this time closer. Fire licked the edge of the wall. Leela screamed as debris fell around them. Broad grabbed her hand, pulling her and John toward the back door. "Stay behind me," he shouted. They burst into the night, the smell of smoke thick in the air. Shadows moved through the trees, men with guns, hunting. Broad fired back, his movements sharp and lethal, but there were too many of them. One bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him sideways. Leela caught him instinctively, dragging him toward the old shed near the edge of the property. Inside, she pushed John behind some crates and turned to help Broad. He was bleeding badly now, his breath ragged, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, were still locked on her. "You're not dying tonight," she whispered fiercely, pressing her trembling hands against his wound. "You hear me? You're not." He gave a faint, pained smile. "You're stubborn. Then fight for me," she begged, her tears falling freely. The sound of gunfire was fading, replaced by the wail of distant sirens. Broad's men must have called for backup, or maybe the police had heard. Either way, the night was ending in blood and smoke. He reached for her hand, his grip weak but deliberate. "If I don't make it, don't you dare finish that sentence," she snapped, her voice breaking. "You promised I'd see you again. Don't lie to me now." His eyes softened, a flicker of emotion crossing his face that words couldn't name. Then he lost consciousness. Leela sobbed, pressing harder on his wound, refusing to let him go. Outside, the night fell silent once more, but the quiet didn't feel like safety. It felt like the moment before fate decided whether to save them or destroy them all. The night was thick with smoke and the copper scent of blood. Leela's hands were slick and trembling as she pressed against Broad's wound, whispering prayers she no longer believed in. The sirens were getting louder, echoing through the hills, their red glow flickering through the trees. Broad's breathing was shallow, but his hand found hers, firm, desperate. "They'll come for me again," he rasped, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "You and John, you can't stay here." She shook her head fiercely, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "Don't tell me to run, not after everything." His eyes flicked open, stormy gray, dimmed by pain yet burning with defiance. "Leela, my world isn't made for you." "Then maybe your world needs to change," she whispered, refusing to look away. When dawn came, the chaos had turned to silence. Broad's men found them, carrying him to safety, while Leela held John close, refusing to let go. The house, their fragile shelter, lay in ruins, riddled with bullet holes and memories that could never be undone. That morning, Leela's heart buried its fear alongside the ashes of her old life. She knew now, There was no going back. Days turned into a blur of hiding and whispers. Broad recovered in a guarded mansion at the city's edge, a place of wealth soaked in secrets. His men moved like shadows through the hallways, guns hidden beneath crisp suits. And yet, when Leela entered his room, all that power faded. He looked at her not as the Mafia boss everyone feared, but as a man who'd finally found something worth losing. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured one night, his voice a mix of warning and longing. She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You said you'd fight for me, so let me fight with you." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what that means." "Then teach me," she said, her tone breaking, not from fear, but resolve. From that night on, she did learn how to aim a gun, how to recognize danger before it struck, how to walk into a room full of killers and not tremble. Every lesson brought her closer to the man behind. The scars. Every stolen glance, every whispered word in the dark, made her heart ache with something too dangerous to name. Broad watched her transform, from the quiet widow who once trembled at the sight of violence, into a woman who could stand beside a king of the underworld without flinching. "You've changed," he said once, his voice low, almost reverent. "You made me," she whispered back. But peace, even borrowed peace, was never meant to last. One evening, as the city lights shimmered like fireflies beyond the mansion walls, Broad's right-hand man, Vito, burst into the room. "They've found us," he said, his voice grim. Broad's expression hardened instantly, the softness in him replaced by the cold fire of a man ready for war. Leela felt her stomach twist. "We can run," she began, but he cut her off. "No, we end this tonight." The air outside crackled with tension. Men loaded weapons, checked magazines, and prepared for the inevitable storm. Leela stood at Broad's side, gripping a gun she never imagined holding. "You can't fight them all," she said, her voice trembling despite her courage. He turned to her, cupping her face in both hands. "I don't fight for power anymore," he whispered, his forehead pressing against hers. "I fight for you." Her heart broke open at those words. Tears blurred her vision, but her hands were steady as she loaded the gun. "Then we fight together." When the night fell, it fell hard. Engines roared outside. The gates burst open. Gunfire erupted like thunder splitting the sky. Leela ducked behind a column as bullets shattered the marble, the sound deafening. Broad moved like a shadow, precise, ruthless, unstoppable. Every shot he fired was vengeance made flesh. But their enemies came in waves, relentless and merciless. Leela's pulse pounded as she returned fire, the recoil jarring through her arm. For a moment, fear threatened to swallow her whole, until she saw Broad glance back at her, his eyes blazing with pride. "Stay with me," he shouted. "Always," she cried back. The battle raged for what felt like hours. Smoke filled the grand hall, and the scent of burning gunpowder hung heavy. Leela's dress was torn, her hands raw, but she didn't stop. Not when men screamed. Not when she saw one fall inches from her feet. Not when the world itself seemed to bleed. Broad fought like a man possessed, his fury unmatched, his love his only anchor. Then came the silence. The last gunshot faded into the night. The mansion was a ruin of bodies and smoke. Broad stood in the center of it all, chest heaving, his shirt soaked in blood. For a fleeting moment, victory looked possible, but then he staggered. Leela dropped her gun and ran. "Broad!" she cried, her voice breaking. He collapsed into her arms, his blood spilling across her trembling hands. "Don't you dare leave me!" she sobbed, pressing his hands to her chest. "Not after everything." His eyes fluttered open, faintly catching the flicker of candlelight. "You were never supposed to be mine," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You don't belong in this darkness." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "Then why does it hurt to lose you?" He tried to smile, weak but real. His thumb brushed her cheek, leaving a streak of crimson. "Because even devils need something pure to believe in." The sound of sirens grew closer, cutting through the fog of gunfire and smoke. Red and blue lights flickered across the broken windows. Leela clutched him tighter, her heart pounding against his fading pulse. "Stay with me," she begged, her voice cracking under the weight of everything unsaid. "Please, Broad." His lips parted, a final breath trembling between them. "If I could live another life," he murmured, his eyes searching hers. "It would be with you." The sirens screamed louder now, the world closing in. Leela pressed her forehead to his, her tears falling onto his skin. "Then don't go," she whispered. "Not yet. But love, like blood, has its limits." His hand slipped from hers. The world seemed to stop. Outside, the sirens wailed for the dead, but inside that ruined mansion, it was her heart that screamed the loudest. And as dawn broke, painting, the smoke and shades of gold and sorrow, Leela held him close, realizing that some loves aren't meant to save us, they're meant to burn us alive. The dawn crept over the horizon, painting the smoke-stained city in soft gold. The war was over, but its ghosts lingered, in the silence, in the ash, in the blood that had dried on marble floors. Leela hadn't moved from his side since that night. Days bled into weeks, her world revolving around the man who lay between life and death. Doctors whispered doubts, his men stood in solemn fear, and yet she stayed, unbroken, unyielding. Every morning she cleaned his wounds, every night she whispered to him stories of peace, of hope, of the life he could still have if he just kept breathing. Her voice became his heartbeat in the dark. Sometimes, when she held his cold hand and begged the universe for mercy, she swore she felt his fingers twitch, as if his soul was still fighting its way back to her. And then one quiet morning, the wind shifted. The mansion was still, the scent of medicine heavy in the air. A faint ray of sunlight slipped through the curtains and brushed across his face. His lashes trembled, a breath, shallow, rough, alive. His eyes opened. For a moment, Broad stared at the ceiling, lost between dreams and reality. The world was quiet, almost too quiet. Then he turned his head, and there she was, asleep beside his bed, her fingers curled tightly around his hand as if afraid he'd disappear if she let go. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, her face streaked with exhaustion. And yet, she had never looked more beautiful. His chest tightened painfully. He tried to speak, but his throat burned. Still, a hoarse whisper escaped. "Leela." Her name fell like a prayer from lips that had only known curses. Leela stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Afraid she was dreaming again. And she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Broad?" He gave the faintest nod, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You didn't leave." Her tears came silently, falling onto their intertwined hands. "I told you I wouldn't," she whispered. "You're too stubborn to die." His laugh was weak, broken, but it filled the room like music. At the door, a small voice interrupted the stillness. "Mama?" John stood there, clutching the doorframe, his wide eyes glistening. When he saw Broad awake, his face lit up with innocent triumph. "Told you she never left your side." Leela turned, her tears now a smile. Broad looked between them, the woman who saved him and the boy who had given him back something he never thought he'd have again: family. He swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "She saved me twice," he murmured, his gaze fixed on Leela. "Once from death, and once from myself." Leela reached out, brushing her fingers through his hair. "You should rest," she whispered, but he shook his head. "Not yet. I've been asleep too long." He lifted her hand, pressing it against his chest, over the faint, steady thump of his heart. "I used to think I didn't have one of these anymore," he said softly. "You proved me wrong." Her lip trembled as she smiled through her tears. "You changed me," he said again, his voice barely above a breath. But Leela shook her head. "No, Broad. You just remembered how to love." The room filled with silence, the kind that carried peace instead of pain. Outside, the sun rose higher, light spilling over the cracked walls and broken glass. the mansion that had seen war now bathed in gold. Broad leaned back, feeling the warmth of morning for the first time in what felt like forever. "It's strange," he said after a moment, his tone thoughtful. "The last time I saw the sunrise, I thought it would be my last." Leela smiled softly. "Maybe it was. The old broad died." That night, he turned his head toward her, his gray eyes no longer cold, no longer haunted. "And who am I now?" She squeezed his hand gently. "The man you were always meant to be." Outside, the sound of the train in the distance echoed faintly, familiar, haunting, yet somehow different now. Broad's eyes flickered toward the window. "The tracks," he murmured. "It started there." Leela followed his gaze, her heart swelling with memory. "And it ends here," she whispered. But he shook his head slowly, a faint smile curving his lips. "No, Leela. It's not an ending. It's the beginning we never thought we'd live to see." He sat up carefully, every movement slow and deliberate. She rushed to steady him, but he caught her wrist, his touch gentle. "Come here." She leaned closer, and his fingers brushed her cheek, tracing the path of dried tears. "I was never the devil you feared," he whispered, his breath mingling with hers. "You made me human again." Her eyes shimmered as his forehead rested against hers. "Then promise me," she whispered. "No more blood, no more running." His lips ghosted over hers in a vow. "Only love," he said, "the kind that makes life worth fighting for." Outside, the morning train roared in the distance, the same tracks where fate had once screamed death, now carrying the sound of new beginnings. John's laughter echoed through the hall, light and free, chasing away the last shadows of their past. Broad smiled, a real smile this time, and pulled Leela closer, his hand resting at the small of her back. The kiss they shared wasn't desperate like before. It was gentle, whole, the kind of kiss that promised forever without needing words. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads stayed pressed together, the silence between them speaking louder than any confession could. "You think the world will ever forgive me?" he asked quietly. Leela's voice trembled, but her conviction didn't. "Maybe not, but I already have." His eyes closed, and for the first time, Broad felt something he had never known. Peace. Outside, sunlight danced across the shattered glass, painting the room in colors neither of them had seen in years. The tracks beyond the window gleamed like threads of silver, stretching into the horizon. Endless. Unbroken. Leela leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. John's laughter carried through the open door, bright and unafraid. Broad wrapped his arm around her, his thumb tracing slow, reverent circles on her hand. "You gave me something I didn't think I deserved," he whispered. "A second chance." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Then don't waste it." He smiled faintly. "Never." And as the morning light filled the room, washing away the last traces of darkness, Broad kissed her again, slow, sure, and alive. Because even the darkest souls deserve someone who teaches them how to love again. Thank you for watching till the end. If you liked my story, please subscribe to my channel, Heartwoven Tales. Press the bell icon so you never miss the next emotional journey. Your feedback means everything, so drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. And stay tuned for the next tale that will touch your heart.